Thanks, Christine. Over to you.
Thank you, Vanessa. Hello, everyone, and welcome. As Vanessa has said, my name is Christine, and I have been invited along this evening to share with you our family's experiences with genetic testing. I think that it is reasonable to say that I came to ovarian cancer from a slightly different angle to many women, and I like to think that our family's story might be a cautionary tale for other people out there. I feel that it demonstrates the value in having the courage to undergo genetic testing if there is any suggestion that you or your family might be at risk of carrying a genetic mutation. I also think that it highlights the value in understanding the risks associated with your genetic status, and also the value in taking that knowledge, learning about it, and then making considered choices that sit well with you. To understand why genetic testing has been important for me, we have to look back over a number of generations at the history of cancer in my family. I always knew growing up during the 70s and 80s that my grandmother, Dad's mum, had died of breast cancer. My aunt, Dad's sister, had died of ovarian cancer, and another of Dad's sisters had breast cancer. My dad was just 13 when his mother died. His sister, with ovarian cancer, died when she was 47. And his sister with breast cancer died from the effects of her treatments in her mid-50s. As an adult, I have also learned that my great-grandmother died from breast cancer too. For some inexplicable reason, I have always felt that this family history of cancer was important to me. I do not understand why, it just was. It is not a topic that was talked about frequently in our family, and it never interfered with my life in any way. It was just there in the back of my mind as something that I needed to be aware of. The loss of so many women in our family from cancer was always the elephant in the room, so to speak. Everyone held their metaphorical breaths and hoped that cancer did not appear in our family again, and we all got on with living our lives as best we could without the presence of these precious family members. In the mid-80s, I went off and trained to become a registered nurse, and with that knowledge in hand, I sat bolt upright and took notice when the BRCA genes and their role in cancer genesis were discovered in the mid-90s. By that stage, I was married with a couple of young children of my own, and there was nothing that could be done at that stage. So yet again, I got on with life, raising my family. In 2001, aged 35, I discovered a small breast lump. My heart sank, and the fears of cancer were very real. Fortunately, that lump proved to be benign, but as a result, our family's cancer history came to the attention of my breast surgeon, and with his encouragement, I attended a familial cancer centre to seek advice regarding the possibility of genetic testing, based purely on family history. Before attending that appointment, I had to fill in a family tree of both sides of my family that identified any cancers that any family member had had. I rang up relatives and I chatted at length with my parents to be sure that I was presenting information that was accurate. At the appointment, the genetic counsellor looked at the information that I had brought and identified our family as high risk for carrying a cancer-causing genetic mutation. But she also advised me that genetic testing at that stage was not possible, as testing could only be offered to a family member who had cancer. And as I said earlier, all family members had died. In 2001, the science of such genetic mutations was still too new. And as I was told, it would have been like looking for a needle in a haystack. I, along with other members of our family, was advised to undergo high-risk surveillance of my breasts. There was no specific recommendation for ovarian cancer screening, however, beyond the suggestion that risk for ovarian cancer did not begin to rise until the mid-40s. 12 years slid by. along with yearly mammograms and breast ultrasounds, as well as several fortunately benign breast biopsies. In late 2013, aged 47, I presented, again with the encouragement of my breast specialist, to the same genetic counselling service for some updated advice. Part of my motivation was my two daughters. They were growing up and leaving home, and I did not know what to tell them regarding their own risks. I wanted some insights so that I could advise them if there was anything that they needed to do. At that appointment, I was told that testing could now be done for our family, that over the 12 years since my first appointment, a database of known mutations had been built up, and that our genetic structure could be compared to that database to identify any abnormalities. The genetic counsellor wanted to test my dad first instead of me, though, as he was the blood relative closest to the women who had been affected by cancer, and there was a higher chance of finding something in him if something did exist. After waiting 3 long months for an appointment, in early 2014, my dad was the first in our family to undergo genetic testing, and they tested 4 of Dad's genes to look for a fault. I am incredibly grateful to my dad for so readily agreeing to do that testing, as ultimately it has made an enormous difference to our family. We waited 2 months for Dad's results to come back, and they showed that he had tested positive for a pathogenic fault on his BRCA1 gene that did put carriers at increased risk of breast and ovarian cancer. On the same day that we got Dad's results back, I underwent my own genetic testing. When my results came back a further 2 months later, I learned that I had inherited that BRCA1 fault from him. My husband was with me when we received the results, and I recall saying to him, well, that's not surprising. Although there was a 50% chance that I had not inherited the fault from Dad, testing positive just reinforced all that I had ever felt, that this was an important issue for me. While waiting over those months for the rather time-consuming process of testing to unfold, I had given a lot of thought to what I would do if my results came back positive, about how I would manage the risk and how I would move forward with that knowledge. By the time I received my positive result, I was 48, so I immediately organised an appointment with a specialist gynecologic oncologist to arrange surgery to decrease my risk of getting ovarian cancer. My ovaries and associated anatomy had served their purpose well, but I felt that they represented an unacceptable risk to me, even though I was in excellent health and precautionary CA-125 blood tests and an ultrasound were perfectly normal. Just 8 weeks after learning of my BRCA positive status, I underwent a risk-reducing bilateral salpingo-oopherectomy and hysterectomy. 36 hours after that surgery, just when I was expecting to be discharged from hospital, the surgeon came into my room, sat on my hospital bed, and told me that a small tumour had been identified on pathology. I already had ovarian cancer. That conversation is firmly embedded in my memory. I recall a weird sense of complete disbelief. There I was thinking that I had been going to decrease my cancer risk when I actually already had it. I still look back on that day with a strange sense of disconnect, like it was someone else's experience or a movie that I had been watching. As I'm sure many of you can relate to, things moved quickly from that point. Appointments with oncologists and oncology nurses, PET scans, loads and loads of pamphlets to read, many tears, endless questions with no answers, overwhelming fears, and 6 rounds of carboplatin paclitaxel chemotherapy. When all that was finished, I tried as best I could to settle back into life after cancer treatment. I recall saying to my husband during chemo that I just wanted to get it over and done with and get my life back. What I had failed to appreciate was that life was not going to be the same as it was before. Of course, I was still me, but it was like I'd been tossed into a parallel universe where things were mostly the same, but not exactly as they were before. That genetic test was the one thing, the only thing that enabled me to get an early cancer diagnosis. Everyone said that I had been lucky to get such an early diagnosis, that I should be fine and the chances of cancer returning were low. The odds were stacked in my favour that we had got to the cancer in time before it had spread. On one hand, I did feel fortunate, but on the other hand, I felt anything but. Over the next 5 years, I slowly settled into the new me. I relished my family, I set goals to look forward to, and I appreciated all that was good in life. At my 5-year follow-up appointment, I was told yet again that I had been fortunate and that after 5 years, I would have to be unlucky for it to come back. 6 months later, in January of 2020, the first little red flag was raised when my routine CA125 follow-up tests were up just marginally, still well in the normal range, but just marginally higher than they had been in the previous 5 years. We entered a more active monitoring phase again over the next few months, but in August 2020, exactly 6 years to the day after my initial diagnosis, came confirmation that the cancer had returned. What followed was more tears, more unanswerable questions, and more chemo. While genetic testing ultimately has not prevented me from getting an ovarian cancer diagnosis, it has enabled other family members to undergo testing and become aware of their risks. I take comfort from that knowledge that my experiences have been of benefit to other members of my family. My siblings, children, 2 surviving aunts, my cousins and their children, my nieces and nephews have been or are going through the processes of being genetically tested. Those who test negative can move forward with their lives free of the fear that comes with living in a high-risk family. And hopefully those who have tested positive will now be able to avoid a cancer diagnosis. Knowing about that pesky mutation has given us all an opportunity to deal with it, to manage it, and to take some sort of control over our own health. No more holding of our collective breaths and waiting blindly for the cancer card to deal its hand. I have also undergone bilateral prophylactic mastectomies and reconstruction to deal with my breast cancer risk. And while I am now facing the confronting reality of living with ovarian cancer for the rest of my life, knowing about the mutation has also given me the option of being able to access drug therapies that have been shown to be a bit of a game changer in the BRCA setting. So here is hoping that the olaparib tablets I now take can hold my cancer at bay for some time to come. Of course, the thought of undergoing genetic testing can be daunting. While the actual process of attending a familial cancer centre, undergoing the genetic counselling session, and having the blood tests were all quite straightforward, I will be the first to admit that I was extremely nervous waiting for Dad's test results to come back. I was aware that finding out information that I had pushed hard for had ramifications for the whole family. I will also be the first to admit that after I found out that I did carry the BRCA1 mutation, that I was uncertain, nervous and scared of the surgeries that I had decided I needed to do. Also, I wasn't sure how other members of my family might view my decisions, but I need not have been concerned. Every member of my family has been very supportive and grateful, I suppose, to finally have some understandings of why so many members of our family have had cancer. The only regret that I have through this whole journey is that time slipped by and I did not return to the Familial Cancer Centre earlier for updated advice that second time. The course of my ovarian cancer might have changed if I had, but of course regrets serve no good purpose to anybody, so I do the only thing that I can do, and that is move forward with life as best I can. The science of genetics is very much an evolving field, and I think it is important that we all continue to monitor its progress. The knowledge base is continually changing, and what might not seem applicable today might well be applicable in the years ahead. We all need to advocate for ourselves and be as informed as we can be for our own health. I continue to try and find more distant blood relatives to inform them of the possibility that they might carry a genetic fault. Through this research, I have identified 3 of my grandmother's cousins who died of breast cancer in their 40s, and quite probably carried the same mutation. I have been able to track down and contact a few distant relatives, but other family branches remain elusive. I was very nervous about contacting them and telling them of their genetic fault. I was a complete stranger to them, and I felt like I was lobbing information into their lives that they may not have wanted. But I felt I had a responsibility to bring this awareness to these people. Generally speaking, they have been very receptive to the information that I have shared. They have been aware of cancer in their families, so it was not a total surprise to them. But how anyone chooses to proceed with the knowledge is theirs, and the decisions that they make are theirs. But I am an enthusiastic supporter of anyone proceeding with testing. I try to find these relatives for a couple of reasons. The first is that I think of my aunts, my grandmother and my great-grandmother, as well as my grandmother's cousins, and I ask myself what they would wish me to do. And every time I ask myself that question, I think that they would encourage me to make the most of an opportunity that they never had. Secondly, I would like to think that if one of the other branches of the family knew about this mutation, that they would have tried to contact our branch to share the knowledge with us. There are two quite famous quotes that also keep me moving forward and encouraging others to consider looking at the option of genetic testing. One is a quote used by a number of influential people, including John F. Kennedy, and it says, "It is better to light the candle than to curse in the darkness. The light of knowledge has the potential to give individuals options instead of just stumbling along, not being aware of the risks that they might carry." The other quote comes from Mary King, who was instrumental in identifying the BRCA genes and recognising their role in cancer. She said that to identify a woman as a carrier of a genetic fault only after she develops cancer is a failure of cancer prevention. While I have not avoided a cancer diagnosis, there is no doubt that identifying the genetic fault changed the course of cancer for me and certainly for my extended family. I'm sure by now you can see that I'm quite the advocate for genetic testing. My experiences have clearly shaped my attitude and approach, and as a result, I am keen to encourage anyone who might have such a genetic predisposition for cancers to try and find out, not only for themselves, but for their families as well. Thank you, Vanessa. Thanks, Vanessa.
Sorry. Thank you so much, Christine, for giving us an insight into your journey and how important genetic testing has been for you. And I know everyone on this webinar will really appreciate you being so open and willing to share your story. I do realise we have gone over time. I do apologise, but it's been just such valuable information that the speakers have shared. So we'll just go with one question. This is for Christine. How have you managed to find your relatives that you did not know?
Good question. I have a very extensive tree on ancestry.com. So I have purchased death certificates for distant relatives, and through those I've managed to basically trace down. Social media has been great. Yeah, but most of it's been through ancestry.com, creating an enormous family tree.
Fantastic. Thank you again, Christine, for giving up your time. We really, really appreciate it.